Well, hello, my name is Eugene McCormick, and I serve as the Minister of Christian Education at the Shiloh Metropolitan Baptist Church in Jacksonville, Florida, under the pastorate of H.B. Charles Jr. Let me first say that I'm very excited to be here with you all and to be a part of this great initiative in regards to Sunday School Matters. And of course, my assignment is the subject or the topic of organization matters. First of all, there are three things that I want to basically point out that will be a part of our time for the next 20 to 30 minutes. And that is, first of all, we want to basically talk about why does organization matter? And we will also do that in regards to sharing some things as relates to providing you as leaders some information about that. Secondly, we want to talk about the what and the how of organization. In other words, we're going to be looking at some of the principles of those things which we can utilize in terms of actually sharing with you how we go about doing organization in Sunday school ministry. And then third, there is a part of the workbook which you have, which is entitled Drive It Home, which means we want you to take some time out to look at some of the principles and things that we have talked about and discussed, and to determine ways that we can take some practical steps in terms of implementing them in our Sunday school ministries. I trust that many of you all in some of our sessions have heard this phrase about reaching, teaching, and ministering to people. That is a theme that I think reoccurs throughout a lot of what takes place in Sunday School Matters. And it's important to recognize that if we truly want to reach people and teach people and to minister to people, we have to be organized to do that. And so if Sunday schools are not organized and function properly, then we're going to fail in fulfilling our purpose. So with that in mind, let's move into our workbook and begin to talk about the importance of why Sunday school matters for the ministry of Sunday school. First of all, it does matter. When it comes to mastering the principles of Sunday school development, understanding the importance and organization is very, very critical. You can see in your workbook, it says that order and organization must always be the first strategic priority. This means that we have to make sure that organization stays on the top of our mind. And you'll see in support of this precept, there's a verse that matters. The verse states here in 1 Corinthians chapter 14 and 40, but everything must be done decently and in order. This means that when it comes to the work of the Sunday school ministry, it cannot be carried out in a chaotic or careless or haphazard manner. Our approach cannot afford to be an arbitrary hit or miss affair. We must make sure that our approach to Sunday school is very clear, very intentional, and very strategic, as our goal is to see transformation come about in the lives of our learners. Secondly, let me say a word about why organization matters by drawing attention to the statement that matters. A statement made by Alexander Milne, who was a British author and playwright of the 20th century. And he's probably more familiarly known as the author of this storybook character called Winnie the Pooh. You remember Winnie? He's the person that gave birth to Winnie. But Milne makes this statement about organization. He says that organizing is what you do before you do something, so that when you do it, it's not all mixed up. Now, that's a very basic and very classic definition for organization, and I believe it will serve the purpose as we view organization for the ministry of the Sunday school. Now, looking back at your workbook, we read this. It says, for any model or concept of ministry to be successful, a solid infrastructure must be firmly set in place. Infrastructure is the central foundation, the underlying architecture of any system, organization that determines how well it functions. Structure should precede strategy. As we consider this principle as to why organization matters, it should be noted that before a strong Sunday school ministry can be built, it is imperative to know what its structure should look like. The principle is very similar to that of building a home. Before one starts to build, one must first develop a set of blueprints. Blueprints help to determine three things: what is to be built, how is to be built, and where it is to be built. And as one parallels the idea of why blueprints matter to the perspective of why organization matters, it becomes very imperative to do three things. And those three things are to define, to design, and to direct the structure of the Sunday school ministry. Now, this leads us to talk about the what and the how of organization, which in turn leads us to talk about the structure and the strategy of Sunday school ministry. So let's begin with initial focus on this first aspect of defining the structure of Sunday school ministry. When it comes to defining the structure of Sunday school ministry, we must first clearly define the purpose of the ministry. The purpose of the ministry. Before you begin to develop the ministry of Sunday school in your church, you must first identify the overarching goal, the overlaying goal of or purpose of the ministry. And it must be so clear to articulate what is being communicated in that. If the purpose and the vision of your Sunday school ministry is not clearly communicated, you will find yourself wading in mediocrity. Many years ago, Pastor Johnny Hunt of First Baptist Church of Woodstock, Georgia, made this profound statement, and it has resonated in my spirit until this day. And he said this: if you don't see it before you see it, you'll never see it. Now, this is a statement of vision and purpose personified. First of all, this statement says to us is that we need to have the capacity to envision the end in mind before we even begin. In other words, it's important for leaders of Sunday school ministry to have a visual portrait of what they want their Sunday school ministry to look like, a visual concept or idea of what it should be like. As Moses was trying to lead the people from Egypt to Canaan, one of the things which he did was to give the people a very visual portrait of where the people were going. If you remember, he said that he was leading them to the promise of a land that was flowing with milk and honey. That land of milk and honey was the visual portrait. In other words, they saw it before they saw it. But secondly, this statement also says to us that we have to identify our target before we reach our destination. We got to identify the target before we reach our destination. In other words, before you see it, you need to know where you're going. And so as Moses led the people out of Egypt, God had given him directions on where to go and what to do. And so it's very important that we establish the purpose of this ministry. But secondly, not only do we need to clearly define the purpose of the ministry, but we also need to clearly define the position of the ministry. The position of the ministry. Scott Schwerty, who is the managing partner for Ethos 3, which is a presentation design consultant agency, makes this statement that you'll see in your workbook. It says, if you don't know where you are, you can't get where you're going. This statement suggests that before you can move toward your purpose, you must evaluate your present position. In other words, it's imperative of us as Sunday school leaders to have a clear understanding of how our ministry currently functions. It's not until we as leaders have a picture of current reality in regards to where we are that we can make significant strides in terms of where God wants us to go. If we look back at the Moses saga, which we just spoken about, God's ultimate purpose for the people of Israel was to inherit the land of Canaan. But when Moses goes before Pharaoh, the present position of the people of Israel was the land of Egypt. And so, first of all, there had to be an understanding of the fact that they have not reached their ultimate purpose because of the present position that they were in. In the same manner, Sunday school teachers and leaders must come to grips with the current reality of their ministries and be willing to work hard and transition themselves from where they are to where God wants them to be. But then thirdly, not only do we need to clarify or clearly define the purpose of the ministry and the position of the ministry, we also need to define the pathway of the ministry. The pathway of the ministry. The statement, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, is a paraphrase of the exchange between Alice and the Cheshire Cat that we'll read about in the great novel Alice in Wonderland. And if you remember that exchange, Alice asked that Cheshire Cat, "Sir, could you tell me which way I should go?" And the cat replies, "Well, where do you want to go?" Alice says, "Well, it doesn't much matter." And so the Cheshire Cat says, "Well, it doesn't matter. You can take whatever road that you want." When we define the structure of the Sunday school ministry, a clearly defined pathway is critical and pivotal. Of course, the ultimate pathway is one that leads to the discipleship and the maturity of learners. And although this destination is the same for every Sunday school, God has given Sunday school leaders the freedom and the flexibility to determine what that pathway should look like for them, based on their context, based on the DNA of their church, and be willing to faithfully travel down that road. Now, at this point, I would like to interject an object lesson, which I think will kind of help to clarify these three areas of purpose, position, and pathway. What I have here in my hands is a GPS, a global positioning system, and there are many devices out here today that are probably a little bit more sophisticated than what I have here, but this will serve the purpose for our illustration. This instrument is designed to provide directions from one point of reference to another by furnishing or supplying what we might call a route of travel to the user. But what should be pointed out about this particular device is that the only thing that this device can do in and of itself is to show us a position. It just shows us current reality. In other words, when we plug this device in, the only thing that this GPS will tell us is where we are. And that's good. But that's not the ultimate purpose for which this device was created. It was basically created for us to know where we are trying to go based upon our current position. So understanding this, what this means is this, is once the purposed destination has been entered and then the present position has been determined, then a clear pathway is defined for the user. And so you have just in this little instrument an idea of purpose, position, and pathway. And in the same manner, we need to be thinking about the organization of our Sunday schools in the same manner. Now let's turn our attention to designing the structure of Sunday school ministry. And of course, there are many ways that this can be done in the life of the church, but I think these five that we'll be talking about here will be very, very key and very, very important. Number one is that we should secure the visible and vocal support of the pastor. In order for Sunday school ministry structure to be successful, it must have the pastor's endorsement. The pastor must be the major champion of Sunday school ministry. If he is not, the battle is just about lost before it begins. We have to make sure that the pastor is not only vocal and visible, but he has a viable presence as it relates to what takes place in Sunday school ministry. The rise and the fall of many Sunday schools rise and falls upon the pastors. Number two, we need to organize a strong but diversified leadership team. Organizing a strong leadership team basically means you're trying to identify people who are going to be committed and dedicated to the cause. Usually this team would be represented, of course, by, as I said, the pastor, the minister of Christian education, if that position exists, Sunday school director, Sunday school superintendent, and other general leaders of the Sunday school. And the purpose of this team is to continually identify the educational needs of the people and begin to try to plan experiences for those people to help meet those needs. And of course, the broader and diverse the group is, the more impact and the scope of what's done will be experienced. Number 3, we need to develop ministry descriptions for all service positions. Would you accept the job without knowing your duties or your hours or who you report to or how much you get paid? Probably not. But isn't that the way sometimes we go about recruiting volunteers for service in the church? Unfortunately, many times we don't even take the time to have a position description identified for people's term of service in the church. And as leaders of Sunday school ministry, it's so important for us to make sure that we take the time to think through every type of ministry position or service that can take place in the church and identify the responsibilities that go along with it. A point to remember is this: if it's important enough to be done, it's important enough to be documented. And so we need to make sure that we are taking time out to identify descriptions for people in terms of service in their church. Number 4, we need to establish parameters for teacher-learner ratios, class size and composition, and starting new units. Now, at this point, you can probably turn off this video, pick up a book on Flake's formula, read the section on enlarge the organization, and as Jesus told that lawyer in that parable of the Good Samaritan, go and do likewise. We could probably really do that. But what we want to understand here is that in developing the structure of the Sunday school, we need to build it for growth by continually enlarging its scope and its ministry by basically adding more and more teachers and more units to what we're trying to accomplish. We cannot also afford to wait until that growth occurs. It's too late to begin new classes and new units based upon the people arriving. We have to be proactive in this particular stance. And there are 2 things that we need to think about doing as mentioned here. We need to look at the teacher-learner ratios. In most settings, from your toddlers to your kindergarten, it ranges from 1 to 2 to 1 to 5 in those ratios. When you get to children, it's more of 1 to 6, youth 1 to 8, adults 1 to 12, and they have some variance, but we have to be thinking about how are we basically looking at the structure of our classes based upon the teacher-learner ratios. And then secondly, we need to make sure we have a commitment to starting new classes and new units, and new classes with as many different affinity groups that we can think of that the church can provide support to. And once we commit ourselves to the process, our goal then is to sit back and watch God do his work. Fifthly, we need to exercise sound decision-making in curriculum selection. As Christian educators, we have been given a divine prerogative to make sure that we are providing sound and substantive teaching for every believer in the church. And this means we have to give careful attention to the curriculum that we are selecting to educate our learners. Just because curriculum sounds good doesn't mean it's good and sound. It's important that we really carefully research the literature, the curriculum that we are giving thought to for our churches, because we want our people to grow up with sound theology. Just as pastors of the church are charged with the feeding of their flock, as education leaders, we too also must be concerned about the curriculum which we are putting and placing before our people for their education. Now, there's much more that I could say about what goes into designing the structure of Sunday school ministry, but I think these 5 principles are certainly a good starting point and very critical for its success. And so in our closing moments, let's turn our attention to directing the structure of the Sunday school ministry. Directing the structure of the Sunday school ministry. First, we need to incorporate the 3 components of reaching, teaching, and ministering into the infrastructure of our ministry. When one surveys the scope of Jesus' ministry, there are three facets that stand out in a most revealing way. The primary focus of Christ was given to reaching people with the gospel of the kingdom, teaching people the word of God, and ministering to people by meeting their needs. When you look in Scripture, verses such as Matthew chapter 4, verse 23, Matthew 9, verse 35, speak about these three primary aspects that were a part of Christ's ministry. And so whatever we do in a Sunday school class, we need to make sure that we do all that we can to incorporate these elements into that time. This can be done in a lot of different ways, but the concept certainly must be a priority in our Sunday school ministries. Number two is that we need to develop an ongoing process of equipping and enlisting teachers and volunteers of the ministry. Develop an ongoing process of equipping and enlisting for teachers and volunteers of the ministry. Training teachers and volunteers who serve in the ministry of the Sunday school must be done on an ongoing basis. Training teachers and volunteers cannot be treated like a trip to the doctor or to the dentist, going annually or going every 6 months. This is something that has to be ongoing and continual, because the recruitment, the orientation, and the training of teachers is the lifeblood of the organization. It must continually flow. And so when it comes to us, we must take very seriously that aspect. Number three, we need to maintain the essential practices of communication, motivation, and delegation. The essential practices of communication, motivation, and delegation. In order for Sunday school ministry to function as a smooth running machine, we need to keep teachers informed, inspired, and involved. This simply means three things. First of all, people need to be engaged and kept abreast of what's going on and what's taking place in the ministry of the Sunday school. Nothing in the ministry of the Sunday school should be going on behind closed doors or people not having knowledge of what's taking place. We need to clearly communicate what's taking place in the Sunday school ministry. Secondly, people need to be continually encouraged. People need to be shown appreciation in terms of their participation and motivated in their desire and in their efforts in working in the ministry of the Sunday school. And then thirdly, people need to be empowered. People need to know that they have a very vital part, a very vital role to play, and that they can be delegated various tasks and responsibilities in seeing the work of the Sunday school be successful. And so we need to make sure that we maintain these elements of communication, motivation, and delegation. Number four, we need to adopt effective administrative processes. This speaks of the fact that there is an administrative side to the work of the Sunday school that cannot be neglected. We have to go through the administrative side. While there are dynamic processes for directing the structure of the Sunday school that involves people, there's also a static process of this structure that involves paper. And that's just something that we have to recognize that's still very important for us to give primary attention to. As you can see in your workbook, this can include things such as planning, budgeting. I might mention calendaring, record keeping, evaluation of both program and personnel. These things have to be done in an administrative way. And although names and numbers and notes don't give us the total picture of what's taking place in our ministry, they do provide something of value to help us to understand what's going on and what's taking place in the Sunday school ministry. Number five, we need to cultivate and constantly nurture strategic relationships with teachers and volunteers and other key church leadership. We have to constantly nurture these strategic relationships. And this is perhaps the most valuable of all the principles of directing the structure of the Sunday school ministry, because this means we have to get to know people. We have to take time to sit down with people, to get to know people, and to begin to develop and to begin to nurture the kind of relationships with them that's going to help our ministries to flourish. I think that a goal of every Sunday school leader ought to be able to sit down and talk with every one of their leaders individually to get to know them and to let them know that you support them and that you are with them in their efforts. And I can tell you from experience, by doing this pays a lot of dividends because it goes a long way towards developing those relationships. And then on top of that, it's also important to develop these relationships with other key leaders in the church because you want to get their buy-in, their support in regards to what's taking place in the Sunday school ministry as well. I call it building leadership capital. In other words, we're trying to get everybody on board in the church and other ministry leaders on board with what's taking place in our Sunday school ministries. And then lastly, number 6, we need to review and identify the needs of people in ministry regularly. As been said before, Sunday school is a very dynamic ministry. It's always in a constant state of flux because of the ever-evolving, ever-changing issues that we see going on about in our society. And so we need to always make sure that we are constantly evaluating the needs of what's going on in the life of our church and our community so that we're staying on the cutting edge of what is taking place in regard to the structure of our Sunday school ministry. Well, I pray that this session on Organization Matters has been very helpful to you. And now I would like for us to turn to the section on Drive It Home because it's there that we want you to begin to dialogue and to discuss some of the things that we've talked about here during our time and to try to make some initial steps and take some initial steps in terms of better organizing the ministry of our Sunday schools. Because remember, organization does matter. God bless you real good.